Hello Year 9 and welcome to your next geography lesson. Today we're going to be looking at further ways of trying to reduce the development gap, but before we do that, let's look back and do a bit of retrieval practice. Answer these 9 questions, please. Give them a go. As you know, I've said this a few times now, you're going to learn more by giving it a go, even if you're not sure. Write something down and we'll check it in 10 minutes. Pause the video now. Okay, so here are some answers for you. You can rewind to check the question if you need to. Double check your answers, make any corrections you need to. Another important part of this process. You've got 5 minutes to do that. Pause now. Okay, fantastic. So reducing the development gap aid, that is your title to write down. Don't forget the date. The objectives are essentially to talk about what aid is, describe examples of it, and then to have a little think about which type of aid is the best. So 1-2 minutes, get yourself sorted, get the title down. Pause now. Okay, so if you could copy the subtitle, what is aid? And this definition, aid is when a country or a non-government organization, otherwise known as an NGO, such as Oxfam, I'm sure you've heard of them, a charity such as Oxfam. Charities are NGOs, but there are also other organizations, other NGOs that are not charities specifically. So, but the easiest way to think of it for yourself is, for now, think of it as a charity. So aid is when a country or a non-government organization such as Oxfam donates resources to another country to help it develop or to improve people's lives. Money could be an example of such a resource to donate. Medical supplies, technical support, help, even people can be donated as such to other countries to help them. For example, if there was an earthquake, countries from all over the world may send search and rescue teams and expert seismologists to those countries to help that country out responding to the disaster. Food can also be the kind of thing that could be sent in aid. So there are 6 main types of aid. They are on this spider diagram in front of you. They can be given separately or in conjunction with another type. So for example, you could have short-term voluntary aid, you could have long-term bilateral aid, you could have long-term multilateral aid, you could have long-term tied bilateral aid. So we can have all sorts of combinations. The key 2 big ones to start with are the top 2, short-term and long-term, because there's a big difference between those 2. Short-term being emergency aid in response to a natural disaster, for example, say a famine or a flood or an earthquake or something like that. That is aimed at just keeping people alive, basically giving people the basics to keep them alive, whereas long-term aid is seen as more sustainable. It's something long-term. It happens now, but it's going to help people out now and in the future. It's going to help people's children out. It's going to help future generations out. And you can see there's a couple of examples there. You've then got the other 2 that go together, bi and multilateral. Bilateral is from one country to another, usually kind of on a government level, from one government to another. And multilateral is when you have an organization, kind of a middleman as such, something in the middle, such as the World Bank, which takes the money from countries and then distributes it out to the poorer countries, to the low-income countries. You've then got tied aid, which any of these could be technically, which is when there's a condition, and voluntary aid, which is the kind of thing I mentioned charities earlier. Charity aid is voluntary. This is where the general public donate money, and that either that money or resources are bought with that money, and that is then sent. So anytime you or your family have donated money to a charity, that is probably voluntary aid, especially if it's going to another country. So what I'd like you to do is to copy that diagram down, please, in your book. Take no more than 10 minutes. Get going at that now. Pause the video. Okay, so what we've got there are 6 key types of aid, and we want to try and remember all of them. So we need to begin the retrieval practice journey. We know by now that is the best way of remembering things, of learning these definitions, of learning these different types of aid. Once you've done that, then you can start thinking about, well, which one's better than another one. But for now, you've got to get them down. So on the screen are 6 definitions from memory. So without looking back in your book, without looking at the definitions, without going back to the last slide, I'd like you to write the numbers 1 to 6 down in a margin, and next to them, just write the names of those 6 types of aid. Try and remember as much as you can. Don't rush this. even when you think you're done, if there's a few that are left out, really think hard, really read those definitions and think, try and recall that spider diagram, try and visualize that in your brain. When you're absolutely done, that's when you can move on the video to the next slide and we'll see the answers. So pause now and get on with that. Okay, so here are your answers. Money donated by the general public in richer countries and distributed by NGOs is voluntary aid. Aid from one country to another, which is often tied, is bilateral aid. Aid may be given with certain conditions, is tied aid. Richer governments giving money to an international organisation, which then redistributes the money as aid to poorer countries, is multilateral aid. Emergency help, usually in response to a natural disaster, such as a flood or earthquake, is short-term aid, and sustainable aid that seeks to improve resilience, how resilient people are, is long-term aid. Now, if you've got any of those incorrect, if you either left them blank or you got the wrong answer down, I'd like you to go back to the last slide. And again, from memory, without looking at this, without looking at any other answers, have another go at it. And I want you to keep going backwards and forwards until you get them all correct. For some of you, you may already have them all correct. For others, this may take a while, but it's really important. I need you to know these terms. So get cracking with that. Pause now. Go back to the last task. Okay, so hopefully you have completed that task. You have correctly named all those types of aid. Now we raise the challenge. You now have the 6 types of aid. I'd like you to write a definition for each of them. So again, numbers 1 to 6 in the margin. All these notes that you're making so far, cover them up. Stick something over them. Make sure that you're not cheating. Make sure you are retrieving this information. And write a definition for all 6 of them. Get cracking with that now. Answers on the next slide. Pause now. Okay, so here are your answers. I'm not going to read through them all again. I've already done that once on the previous task. I'll let you do it. And once again, if you've missed any out, if you've got any wrong, you're going to go back to the last slide. You're going to do that task again and again and again until you can define all 6 of these exactly as we see here. Pause now and get on with that. Okay, so you are now an expert in those 6 types of aid. For now, at least, you should have all 6 types of aid and their definitions well and firmly in your head. Now, yes, you're likely to forget those. If we don't come back to those again repeatedly, you are going to forget them. But for now, at least, the hard work is done. Well done. So let's talk about the disadvantages of aid. Copy that subtitle. Should take you a minute. Pause now. Okay, so a task here of matching up. You've got the numbered beginnings of the sentence on the left and you have the lettered ends of the sentence on the right. Match them up and write them out. So you should end up with 5 sentences correctly matched up. Answers on the next slide. Pause now and get thinking. Okay, so here are your answers. Charities may have high costs of administration, that is, in their offices, in their paperwork, in all the things going on behind the scenes. So not all the money raised will go directly to those who need it in low-income countries. It's a really common criticism aimed especially at some of the bigger charities, because the bigger the charity, the higher their costs are. And this is paying people's wages. This is all of those things going on often in high-income or middle-income countries. So this is money not going to the people who actually really need the aid. B, if aid is always available, countries may start to rely on it, so they become dependent on aid. A really bad situation for a country. If the aid is taken away, they don't have any resilience. This is not long-term sustainable aid. This is usually short-term aid done over and over again, to the point where the people and the government there just rely on it. They have no idea how to survive without it. Never good. C, aid doesn't always help the people who need it, so it does not always help those in greatest need. There are many reasons for this. For example, it could be, it's links to E actually. One of the possible answers could be that the government or the organisation handing it out just doesn't get it to the people who need it. It goes to other places. D, money which is loaned needs to be paid back, so a country can easily get into further debt keeping to these conditions in repaying it. So aid can sometimes be needed to pay back, so there's a problem. And finally, E, corrupt governments may use the money for themselves, so the money doesn't get to those who need it most. There are some countries out there where people are living in abject poverty, yet the rulers are living in mansions and palaces. That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. So definitely a problem there. They're essentially stealing, because the aid was never intended to go to those people, but they've managed to make it happen. So there we go, 5 disadvantages of aid. Okay, so a final task for you today. You've looked at the 6 main types of aid. You've looked at some of the disadvantages of aid in general. And now I'd like you to go back to those 6 you learnt about in that spider diagram. And you can look at that now. You don't need to remember it. If you can remember it, great, well done. But just to check, you can look at it as well. And I'd like you to rank the types of aid as to which you think is the most appropriate in reducing the development gap, which is best, basically. Number 1 is going to be the best, number 6 is the worst. I'd like you to rank them, and then I'd like you to justify it. It says you must justify your order. And there are some sentence starters at the bottom to help with that. This is a short paragraph telling me why you've chosen your number 1 and your number 6, I think. We don't need to do all 6 of them. We'll be here all day with that. That'll take you an hour in itself. So 1 to 6 should take you 10 minutes or so to get that done. And this takes you to the end of the lesson. So on that note, this is a great task to email your teacher. That'd be lovely to see your work. Have a great day. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.